They waited and waited for the wounded.
It's now more than 6 hours since the first plane hit the World Trade Center. The doctors, nurses, medical supplies are still coming into this triage center that they're still organizing. And as far as we can tell, they have not yet brought a single patient in from ground zero. In other words, from anybody who may have been in the World Trade Center itself. We're still seeing the ambulances lining up. No patients. They're still clearing the area down there.
As emergency medical personnel had to change their plans on the fly, so did the big Wall Street investment firms. In driving around, we came upon a knot of people on 11th Street trying desperately to get their cell phones to work. And who were they?
Right at the moment, this is the command headquarters for Merrill Lynch around the world. So,
really, your
little townhouse in the village, yeah,
is the global center of Merrill Lynch.
Right for the moment.
Center.
Right for the moment, yeah.
Little black door right there.
Yeah.
This is Paul Critchlow's house in Greenwich Village. He's Merrill Lynch's director of communications. When the first plane hit the World Trade Center, his company's emergency evacuation plan kicked in.
We heard an explosion, and we thought it was most of us thought it was a supersonic, boom or something. And then we started getting reports from our own security people and obviously on TV and radio. And then we heard a second explosion, and I'd say right around 9 o'clock we ordered an evacuation of both of our buildings, which are adjacent to the World Trade Centers in the World Financial Center. So about 9,000 people, right.
9,000 people evacuated.
9,000 people, right.
So how did you get up here?
We walked.
9,000 people walked?
Well, everybody evacuated either to the north or to the south.
It's like a biblical exodus.
It really is. And so basically now you have these people are all senior executives and communications personnel. And this is where we're regrouping to try to figure out how we mobilize to keep our operations trading and all that sort of thing, and to find out what's the status with regard to all of our employees.
Government agencies, medical staff, and companies all had plans. But most New Yorkers simply didn't know what to do. And so...
We're just a couple of blocks from that new Merrill Lynch headquarters. Just a couple of blocks, we came upon St. Vincent's Hospital. And all these people that you see behind me are all lined up in different lines to donate blood. They're lined up by their blood type. There must be between 5,000 and 10,000 people here.
You're sitting there wondering what you can do and how you can help, and you can't go down there.
And you feel helpless.
And you feel helpless, and you want to contribute, and
If you look around, there are so many people here who want to donate blood. There are people who are giving out free food. There are people giving water, and I mean, it's small comfort. But at the same time, it's like the worst brings out the best in people, and that's what you are seeing.
As I walked around today, there were a lot of people in the streets, and what struck me was how quiet it was. This is a city of really loud people, but not today. Taxi drivers weren't even blowing their horns. Now, you might have expected to find anger, but what we encountered was shock and sadness and, Dan, profound silence.
And that silence extends tonight. I want to show you a live picture. This is looking south on Manhattan Island, south toward Our Lady of Liberty, the Statue of Liberty, the right-hand side of your screen, great Empire State Building in Midtown Manhattan, and then beyond, the smoke and, yes, still the flames from what happened today at the World Trade Center. Now, this just in from New York City. Marcia Kramer, former newspaper woman now working with WCBS TV in New York, says that sources have told her that 2 people have been arrested with explosives under the George Washington Bridge. The George Washington Bridge, for those of you unfamiliar with the city, connects a part of New Jersey with Manhattan. So 2 people arrested on the GW Bridge in a truck with explosives, as this report. Now, whether it was connected with the events of the day, we do not know, but an interesting report. President Bush said tonight, "Our nation today saw evil." And referring to scenes just such as this is the live shot in Manhattan tonight, the president says, "These acts shattered steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve." Unquote, President Bush tonight. You are watching continuing CBS News coverage of the attack on America.
tonight. Attack on America.
I saw the plane hit the building.
And a nightmare unfolds.
It's got to be a terrorist attack.
In New York, hijacked planes slam into the World Trade Center.
Move out of the way! Let's go! Hey, come on!
And the Twin Towers crumble. In Washington, a plane dives into the Pentagon.
We are at threat condition Delta. That is the highest condition that we can go to.
And near Pittsburgh.
Witnesses reported seeing the large passenger plane take a nosedive.
Still another plane crashes.
Some 44 people on board, all believed dead.
A country is outraged. The world is stunned.
Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
Who is behind it? What happens next? The deadliest attack ever to strike America. As terror hits home.
Terror hits home. In the history of our country, we had Remember the Alamo, then Remember the Maine during the Spanish-American War. We had Remember Pearl Harbor, and now Remember the Twin Towers. We're back now live at CBS News World Headquarters in New York. CBS's special coverage of the attack on America rolls on. The headlines at this hour. In a White House address tonight to the American people, President Bush said, quote, thousands of lives were suddenly ended, unquote, in today's terror attacks on targets in New York, in and around the nation's capital, and in southwestern Pennsylvania. President Bush said the United States will not distinguish between the terrorists behind the acts and those who committed the acts and those who harbor them. Here in New York City, well into the night, the desperate search for victims continues. At the site where two hijacked commercial U.S. jetliners were used to ram the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. Both towers, where generally speaking about 50,000 people work, collapsed. A third building in the tower complex collapsed later in the day, a 47-story building, World Trade Center Building 7. President Bush says the death toll is in the thousands. A third hijacked jetliner was sent slamming into the Pentagon. A fire department source at the Pentagon is now quoted by CBS's David Martin as saying 100 to 800 bodies may still be trapped inside the complex there, underscore the word may. A fourth hijacked plane, possibly being diverted to the Washington area, crashed about 80 miles from Pittsburgh in southwestern Pennsylvania. Now, at least 285 people were killed on the hijacked planes alone, and a picture's been created from 911 cell phone calls and others of stewardesses being attacked, flight attendants being attacked on these aircraft with knives. On at least two of the planes and possibly a third, that is believed to have happened. Passengers were terrorized on some of the flights for a long while before the planes crashed. The Federal Aviation Authority has ordered an unprecedented shutdown of air traffic nationwide. That will last at least through noon tomorrow. The U.S. military is on alert. The financial markets will be closed tomorrow. They will be closed until further notice, but we're told they will be closed tomorrow. CBS News national correspondent David Martin is covering developments at the Defense Department at the Pentagon tonight. David?
Dan, a little more on that estimate of between 100 and 800 bodies still trapped inside the Pentagon. The high number, 800, is based on the fact that 850 people are believed to work in that area of the Pentagon, and they've gotten 60 survivors accounted for in area hospitals, so that's where you get the high number of 800. The low number comes from the fact that 67 people were on board the plane that crashed into the Pentagon, and that's where the estimate of 100 bodies still trapped in there originates. That's an awfully wide margin of error, but that's the best information they have right now.
David, the Pentagon is trying to get back to as close to normal as it can. How realistic is it that the Pentagon will be able to operate with anything approaching efficiency tomorrow?
Well, I think you can operate the United States military. The command centers never went down, and of course there are command centers at all the regional commands as well. So the ships will steam, the planes will fly. That's not the problem, but a lot of routine business of managing this huge enterprise called the defense of the United States will not get done simply because so much of that building is going to take months, if not years, to repair.
David Martin live outside the Pentagon, where a fire department official says 100 to 800 bodies may yet be in the Pentagon. Now, WCBS TV News in New York is reporting 2 people arrested by the FBI in a truck with explosives under the George Washington Bridge. The GW Bridge spans the Hudson River connecting New York City and New Jersey. Whether this arrest by the FBI is connected with other events in the day, one can only question. More than 1,000 victims of the World Trade Center attack were taken to New York City hospitals, stretching resources to the limit, and that includes up to this hour. CBS News medical correspondent Elizabeth Caledon is at New York University Medical Center for us tonight. Elizabeth?
Well, Dan, ambulances and police emergency vehicles continue to stream by here as they have been doing all day, but it really could be days before we know the exact number of injured and dead. And that means more grueling days of work for area hospitals, doctors, and nurses. Now, nearly all the hospitals in the region were instantaneously transformed into trauma centers, with every bit of space being used for patient care. And as hard as it is to imagine that this could ever happen, hospitals here say they were prepared for it.
By evening, the numbers of injured were stacking up at New York City hospitals, 140 at Bellevue, more than 300 at St. Vincent's. The most serious cases carried by dust-covered ambulances to whatever emergency centers could take them.
We had people with severe burns covering most of their bodies and their faces. We had a variety of people that came in cardiac arrest.
Bellevue, one of the city's biggest trauma centers, treated injured when the World Trade Towers were bombed back in 1993. Today, it was deja vu. Patients here were treated for burns and smoke inhalation, head injuries, and broken bones.
They actually extricated one guy that had his legs amputated. He said that the amount of patient, the extent of the injuries, you can't really predict.
It was also deja vu for Marlene Cruz, who was at work the day the World Trade Towers were bombed, and now this. He was in an elevator that plummeted when the plane hit the building.
I was screaming because I didn't know what the hell was going on. I had all the debris, concrete, everything fall on top, you know, so I wasn't sure.
Doctors speculate they are just beginning to see the extent of death and injury. There will be much more to come in the days ahead. Even emergency medical people trained for this type of thing can't believe it's happening.
It's an unbelievable thing. You keep thinking that you're about to wake up and it was all just a nightmare, and it really isn't real. I mean, it's just so unbelievable that this would happen.
A call for blood brought out hundreds of donors, too many for the hospital to accommodate. Those turned away are being asked to come back again in the coming days.
In addition to the physical injuries, of course, another major concern is the psychological wounds, the people who survived all this, the people who witnessed the unforgettable sight of bodies hurling out of those World Trade Tower windows. They will also be included in the numbers of victims and are likely to require medical intervention, Dan, possibly for years to come. Dan?
Elizabeth Caledon at New York University Hospital, St. Vincent's Hospital, which is right on the edge of the disaster area, along with NYU Hospital and so many other New York City hospitals, been doing Herculean work all during the day and now well into the night. Even U.S. cities that were not targeted specifically by the terrorists felt the aftershocks of today's attacks as airports closed and life ground to a halt or something nearing that in many sections of many cities. Bill Whitaker has that story from Los Angeles. Bill?
Dan, it's the nature of terrorism that victims don't know where or when the next will occur. So even here, 3,000 miles away, the terror and the horror struck deep. The Crystal Cathedral in Orange County opened its doors to all faiths to come together for comfort and support. While some turned to prayer, others turned to force. FBI agents with fingers at the ready ring the main federal building in Los Angeles. For some, the shock is turning to anger. Muslim groups in Los Angeles say they're receiving death threats and pleaded with their countrymen not to blame all for what a few may have done.
The pain of this country is in fact our pain.
The Los Angeles city attorney called for unity and calm.
As residents of the most diverse city in the world, we must also be careful not to allow these terrorists to turn us against each other and target or blame certain ethnic groups.
But with all the hijacked planes originally headed for California, the state is feeling vulnerable. Fearing the nation's second largest city might also be a target, workers fled downtown high-rises, leaving the heart of Los Angeles a ghost town. City government, law enforcement, indeed the entire city was on high alert.
We believe that whatever could have happened in New York could very likely happen here.
The entire West was on alert. The Transamerica Pyramid in San Francisco, even Seattle's Space Needle closed down, leaving tourists stunned.
To Pearl Harbor, magnified 10 times.
There's heightened alert on the Golden Gate and Bay Bridges, San Francisco's main links. Even Disneyland, the self-proclaimed happiest place on earth, joined other California amusement parks and closed down in fear.
Obviously, what they want is to shut down the country, and that's exactly what they've done.
I mean, it's scary to think that something like this could happen in the United States. I mean, you feel safe here, and now you don't feel as safe.
The West's water and energy suppliers are taking no chances either. At Hoover Dam, boats and bomb-sniffing dogs are on patrol. Armed guards stand outside the San Onofre nuclear plant near San Diego. The Navy threw up barricades at its 32nd Street station, also in San Diego. Up the road, Marine Camp Pendleton went on Threat Condition D, the highest level of alert, meaning an attack is expected or imminent.
Right now, they are checking every car that's on base.
People wanting, even needing to do something lined up in San Diego and in Los Angeles to give blood. But with special edition headlines screaming terror, many other people are feeling helpless.
We are held hostage until we find out exactly who did it, and we don't know. And what measures should we take to do that and to prevent it? I don't think we're going to be safe for a while.
Even despite the best efforts of the best of us. Jim Laval is the brother-in-law of John Oganowski, pilot of American Flight 11, the first plane to slam into the World Trade Center. He says he's sure his brother-in-law pilot resisted any hijackers with all his strength.
I cannot even begin to fathom John Oganowski doing that. I mean, you know, he would walk through a fire with a suit made of gasoline for his passengers before he would do something like that.
Tonight there are prayer services throughout the West, Americans coming together to pray for the victims and their country. Dan?
Bill Whitaker live from Los Angeles. Now, the Associated Press, along with some other news organizations, reported that the New York City Police Commissioner had confirmed that there were people known to be alive inside the World Trade Center. Now, for clarification and accuracy, the police commissioner has said that there are people alive in nearby buildings downtown, nearby to the actual collapsed buildings area, but the police commissioner did not say he knew of people alive in the Trade Center itself. Mayor Giuliani has said earlier that he believed that there were people alive in the debris, and based on past acts such as the Oklahoma City bombing, the possibility remains alive that there are alive people in some of the debris, but just wanted to clear that up. CBS News correspondent Harold Dow has been covering this story from the beginning. It's far from over, the search for survivors, the digging for wounded, and for that matter, bodies. Harold Dow is on scene as night rolls ever deeper on the lower Manhattan.
Lower Manhattan this afternoon became a deserted war zone. Inches of thick, choking dust, burned out cars, and mountains of rubble have replaced the bustle of the business world.
Everybody, keep moving.
Everyone has been turned away. The journalists, the curious, even the residents who live here will find themselves homeless tonight. Only rescue workers are allowed beyond the barriers in their desperate search for victims. It is a truly overwhelming scene. Hundreds of exhausted firefighters and rescue workers climbing over mounds of concrete and tangled metal. A scene that certainly seems more familiar to Americans on a movie screen than in real life. As we reported earlier, about 200 firefighters are feared dead and about 87 police officers are reported missing. By tomorrow morning, as many as 3,000 National Guard troops are expected in New York City. So far, 750 Guard troops have reported to various posts in Manhattan. Governor Pataki has also ordered the Guard to bring in heavy equipment such as water tankers, cranes, wreckers, loaders, and dump trucks. And as Dan, night has fallen on lower Manhattan, and as you look into the direction of the World Trade Center, it's still just hard to believe that those two giant towers have been brought down.
Harold Dow, live in lower Manhattan. We have with us at our CBS News World Headquarters news desk and anchor desk in New York, Gary Sick, currently director of the Middle East Institute at the world-famous Columbia University here in New York, former National Security Council member under Presidents Ford, Reagan, and Carter. Thanks for being with us, Mr. Sick.
Pleasure.
What type of planning went into this attack?
I think this is really a key issue because if you simply stop and think about the magnitude of this operation, they were able to penetrate security in two major airports, get people on board, provide their own pilots, because they obviously had their own pilots to do.
Suicide pilots.
Suicide pilots, but pilots who were qualified to fly a major airplane. And I personally watched the second plane go into the trade towers, and there was no flinching and no swerving. He flew right straight into it, and it was clear that no American pilot, no commercial pilot would ever have done that. And you stop and think about the amount of time, back it up, how much time would have been required, and the money and the organization. Let's put it this way. What if you're the president in the Cold War days and you tell the CIA that you'd like to create a little operation in Russia which would basically hijack 4 airplanes and within a period of an hour crash them into major sites in the Soviet Union, and you had to organize that? It would have stretched our capabilities absolutely to the limit, and yet that's what happened here today.
Reporters are always trained to follow the dollar, look for the money. Who finances an operation like this? Took a lot of money.
It took money and it took professionalism. I personally think that this had to have had a professional organization behind it. If you look at the kind of operations that Osama bin Laden and others have conducted in the past, the most sophisticated stuff they've been able to manage is a car bomb. And car bombs are dangerous and they're deadly, but they aren't like what we saw today. And this business of organizing, they had to recruit in the United States. They had to have Americans. They had to have some way of passing through the security in this country. That meant money, but it meant tremendous organization. And the fact that all of this, if you stop and think about it, it's amazing, went unreported, unnoticed by any of our systems, which were watching all of these specific organizations, raises the question, were we looking in the right place?
Well, let's pursue that question. Whom do you think may be responsible for this?
You know, I really don't want to speculate because I think it's, at this stage it's a pure guess. Everybody is speculating about Osama bin Laden. Maybe so. But if so, he has moved his operations to a level that this is the largest and most successful terrorist operation in history. And he was simply not up to that. He had a bomb in a boat, and he had some car bombs outside embassies.
This is far beyond that.
This is something of an, and it's in this country.
Well, let me ask
talking
a question
about East Africa.
I know you don't want to speculate, and neither do I, but it's inevitable as these questions flow on. That if it was or was not Osama bin Laden, you've said it was well financed, it was exceptionally well planned, a very sophisticated and large operation. If the president asked you, what are the chances, Gary Sick, that Saddam Hussein or one of the radical mullah groups in Iran were responsible, would you rule it out?
Saddam Hussein today said that this was the operation of the century. And there was great celebrations in Baghdad, not in Iran. But, you know, if you had to look for a culprit in terms of organization, structure, money, professionalism, all of the things that go with it, That's one place that you would certainly have to look. And I think that our intelligence services are going to have to do a really careful step back from where they've been looking and start looking under some different rocks, because I think there are some things going on that we haven't really observed.
We have only a few seconds left here, but we spend billions of dollars on intelligence. Does this or any other president have the will to zero base our whole intelligence operations?
No, but intelligence works when you're looking in the right place, and I've seen it. The Israelis in 1973 and elsewhere had the information, but they didn't know what to do with it. They were looking in the wrong way, and they thought they knew what was going on, and they interpreted it wrongly. I think that we need to step back from it and take a hard look at our interpretation of the information that we probably already got.
Gary Sept, thank you very much.
Indeed.
Around the country today, schools closed, churches opened, and the daily routine of life was suddenly changed. Bob McNamara has more now on the attack on America and how it was felt throughout America.
Half a continent away, flags in Dallas were lowered to half staff as fears climbed.
I'm scared to death about what's going on, and it's just crazy. Everything's crazy.
No matter where you were, no place seems safe.
I feel like a sitting duck, and I just can't wait to get home.
The doomsday images that filled the day's television screens had Americans on edge. Iowa's state capitol was evacuated. Shopping mall parking lots were vacant. And airports coast to coast were eerily empty as flights were canceled and jetliners parked.
Yes, I'd like to make reservations.
But most stranded travelers kept calm.
I'd rather them shut down everything and inconvenience everybody than to have another tragedy happen.
In Dallas and other cities, a flood of donors answered emergency calls for blood.
Unfortunately, it takes a disaster like this to really show America does care about one another.
The crisis seemed to touch everybody.
First thing I did, I got up and I came in my pajamas actually, and I just, as fast as I could, try to donate blood.
But the scene here recalled another terror attack.
The only thing I can really compare it to would be the Oklahoma City bombing. The response to that was tremendous as well.
Until today, the Oklahoma City bombing had been the worst act of terror on American soil. And the nightmare of those 6-year-old images brought many to the Oklahoma City National Memorial.
We wanted to stop by and just get a feeling again for what people are feeling in New York, and obviously you get a hard feeling in your stomach when you come to a place like this.
Churches in hundreds of cities and towns held prayer vigils as they do during this nation's darkest hours. But any gathering today was a source of comfort for many.
We'll overcome what's happened. It may take a little time, but we'll do it.
Tonight, though far from the day's chaos, many Americans are feeling vulnerable and trying to stay hopeful in a world full of hurt. Bob McNamara, CBS News, Dallas.
A world full of hurt. And the exact death tolls in New York and in Washington remain open to question tonight. Nobody really knows the number of people killed and or injured. We do believe we know that 285 people, at least 285 people aboard the 4 hijacked planes that were crashed died. So we know that death toll figure is pretty solid. If you were listening closely, you probably did note, if you weren't with us at the time when Gary Sept spoke a few moments ago, one of this country's ranking experts on national security affairs, and he said, this is almost a direct quote, that it may or may not turn out to be Osama bin Laden was at the head of this operation, but, said Gary Sept, it does not fit his profile. And Gary Sept's counsel was to look at other places for perhaps allies who could have been involved in this, or some kind of state-sponsored terrorism. Gary Sept. Now, this attack on America was an attack first and foremost on powerful symbols of our beloved United States. Richard Schlesinger has more on what these symbols represent and why they were targets.
It didn't take long for the images of this sneak attack on the United States to remind people of another one, December 7th, 1941.
A date which will live in infamy.
Pearl Harbor is one of the first things that comes to mind.
Evan Cornog is a Columbia University historian and journalist.
After Pearl Harbor, there was the Japanese fleet to go after. One knew where to find the enemy. Here, it's a much more complicated issue.
Pearl Harbor was an attack on the U.S. Navy, a symbol of American power at the time. Today's attacks on the Pentagon and the World Trade Center struck at modern symbols of American power and prestige.
Those towers are saying, look at us, we're important. And somebody has come along and said, you're not as important as you think.
The pictures of the destruction are destined to become images for the ages.
The image of that airplane crashing into the side of the building, the image of the collapsing towers, those are going to be things that just stay riveted in our memories. Like the flag at Iwo Jima. You see those pictures and a whole era and a whole set of issues is called to mind. And I think we haven't yet seen, don't know yet what all the defining images of this event are going to be. But they're going to be there in our memories as long as we live.
The symbolism of this attack was impossible to ignore overseas.
The feeling is that throughout the world, the Americans are not as powerful as they were thought to be. Therefore, these terrorists were really going to achieve a symbolic victory.
But officials here in New York and in Washington know the difference between a symbolic victory and a real victory. When the World Trade Center was brought to the ground, the country was brought to its knees. But terrorism experts say just for a while. For years, authorities have practiced for attacks like today's, many times under the direction of Jerome Hauer, who was an emergency management official in New York.
You have to plan for the worst. That's just, particularly in a city like in New York, in Washington, D.C., the real thing is never like a drill. The enormity of the situation today is just incredible.
Did the bad guys win today? They got that image. They got
well. They certainly
our attention.
Struck a blow today. There's no question about it. But we are a very resilient nation, and we are very resilient people.
And we're a very different people than we were just before 9 o'clock this morning when this all began. Richard Schlesinger, CBS News, New York.
And now to Washington and CBS News Chief White House Correspondent John Roberts. John?
Well, Dan, we have some late-breaking information. After his address from the Oval Office, the president went immediately into a briefing with his national security team. Condoleezza Rice, I believe that Colin Powell may have been there upon his return from South America. A senior administration official telling CBS News tonight that there is good information that Osama bin Laden's al-Qaeda group was behind today's terror attacks, Dan. Now, to give you some kind of an idea of just how seriously they were taking security moving the president around. Some video that came into us late today, taken from inside Air Force One by cameraman George Christian, who was on the plane with the president. You can see outside the wing of the aircraft, Air Force One being shadowed by two fighters. There's an F-16 off of one wing and I believe an F-15 off of the other wing. So, Dan, this was on the way back from Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska as the president was coming back to Andrews. They were definitely taking this seriously, but apparently the president comfortable enough that he's back in the White House tonight. Dan?
John Roberts live at the White House. And so from out of the skies, tragedy has rained down on a nation. It was swift, deliberate, terrifying. In a matter of moments, in one city, a towering American icon was destroyed. And in another, the greatest symbol of our national might was set ablaze. What once seemed unthinkable has happened. On a bright summer morning, under a clear and cloudless sky, terror struck. The toll has been devastating. It may be days or even weeks before the final accounting is done in terms of dead and wounded. To grasp the enormity of it is almost too much for the heart to bear. This night, we can only look back in sorrow at a world that has suddenly, perhaps irrevocably, been changed. And tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, and in days and years to come, we will look at the calendar and remember September 11th, 2001. It is a date that will be etched in history, engraved in stone, and in our memories. The day of the attack on America. We leave you tonight with these images, flashpoints from a day that cannot be forgotten. For the latest on this still unfolding story, stay tuned to this CBS station. There'll be complete coverage on the early show and on the CBS Evening News. And we will have continuing CBS News coverage on some of these stations. On some other stations, we will not see until sometime tomorrow morning. I'm Dan Rather in New York.
where local news comes first. This is 9 Eyewitness News Tonight.
Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America.
President Bush vows to avenge the killings of Americans who perished in today's terrorist attacks. 14 hours after hijacked planes shatter the country's financial center and then damage the very heart of the military establishment, Americans struggle to deal with the magnitude of the tragedy. Tonight, the Washington area and New York City remain on a state of alert. Good evening. Welcome to this expanded edition of 9 Eyewitness News. I'm Gurveer Dinza.
I'm Gordon Peterson. America was targeted for attack because we are the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world, and no one will keep that light from shining. President Bush's response tonight to the deadly terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon here in Washington.
God bless America.
And this was the message of a politically divided Congress to the terrorists who mounted the attack. We are one. We are Americans first. When you attack some of us, you attack all of us.
Home, sweet home.
Two hijacked airliners smash into the World Trade Center's twin 110-story towers. 50,000 people worked there. We don't know how many people were killed in the crashes and in the subsequent collapse of the towers, but we do know the numbers will be horrific.
Carried her down 68 floors, man. And then we got lost on the 5th floor. It was chaos.
And the Pentagon, at 9:38 this morning, an American Airlines 757 smashed into the headquarters of the American military giant. No numbers, but the Secretary of Defense says the numbers will be high.
I looked up and I saw this American Airlines jet coming in very low, and I watched it, and it clipped. I don't know if you can see it over here. It clipped this pole over here, hit another pole, and slammed right into the building. Huge explosion, and then utter pandemonium, as you might imagine. I mean, everybody was screaming, "Oh my God!"
This evening, a grim-faced President Bush had this to say in an address to the American people.
The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
No distinction between the terrorists who committed the acts and those who harbor them. A message for Afghanistan's Taliban rulers who have been harboring the man whose name comes up most frequently, Osama bin Laden. And Virginia Senator John Warner, a veteran of 2 wars, urges other nations not to give cover to the terrorists.
We call upon the entire world to step up and help, because terrorism is a common enemy to all, and we're in this together. The United States has borne the brunt, but who can be next? Step forward and let us hold accountable and punish those that have perpetrated this attack.
Afghanistan's ruling Taliban party quickly called a news conference. We do not harbor Osama bin Laden, they said, and besides, this was much too complicated an operation for him. American intelligence operatives, however, disagree.
Here in Washington, D.C., ground zero of today's terrorist attacks was at the Pentagon.
And as the search and rescue effort continues tonight, fire officials tell 9 Eyewitness News there could be hundreds dead there. Dave Statter joins us now live with the latest. Dave?
The fires continue to burn. Arlington Fire Chief Ed Plogger said the smoke will continue to pour out of the underside of the roof here at the Pentagon through the night. They will not begin an aggressive attack again until morning. The urban search and rescue crews say they are searching the outside rubble overnight for possibly any survivors. A lot of firefighters aren't optimistic, but the urban search and rescue guys say you have to be optimistic. We have to think we're going to rescue people here. They will go more aggressively in the morning and daylight and go inside. They're working up their plan of attack. As far as those who may have died here, in that gaping hole in the Pentagon is the fuselage of the plane. It's pretty much incinerated. Certainly the people on the plane, Arlington Fire Chief Ed Plogger says the estimates from the Pentagon, the high estimate, is around 800. But it could be a lot lower, and everybody is hoping and praying that it's lower.
2 Fort Belvoir firefighters on the ground at the Pentagon heliport saw the plane heading right at them. There was nothing they could do but help those who needed help after the crash. We are told one firefighter rescued 5 people out of a Pentagon window with jet fuel burning all around.
I recognized that the plane was coming in low, and I thought it looked funny, but I didn't put two and two together, and then it sheared off the top of that pole over there, slammed into another pole, and went right into the building. There was a massive explosion and absolute chaos afterwards.
This is outrageous. No one could ever expect something like this.
There aren't words to describe what's happened.
As firefighters put water and foam on the burning wreckage, others tended to the burn victims. 2 men with severe burns were taken away by medevac helicopter. The fire then quickly spread through the halls on the west side of the Pentagon. 39 minutes after the plane slammed into the building, 5 floors of the Pentagon tumbled to the ground.
We were just running, trying to get out of there. I mean, everything, ceiling tiles were falling in, and what was going through my mind is when I was out there was to make sure that we were all getting out of the building okay. Because all we were just, because we didn't know what to do. We panicked, and we couldn't breathe because all the fumes, all the gasoline fumes was hurting us. I am just, thank God that I'm not in there, because that's where my area is. That's where I work.
The fires burned through the night, breaking through at numerous spots in the roof of the building. Firefighters from throughout the region are assisting in the effort to bring the fire under control. Urban search and rescue crews from Montgomery and Fairfax started their reconnaissance, preparing a plan to begin moving into the building, trying to be optimistic that there will be survivors.
This close to home, it's a disaster, and it certainly touches everybody that's here working. We have to look at it as a rescue effort for us. We have to look at it as a very unstable building, and our job pretty much is to take the name of the Pentagon off the outside.